towards Iran and striking some of these targets? Were they not used? What other kind of assets may have been used? One of the things that I think that has been lost here over the last week or so is that the United States has had a very strong military aerial presence in the region already. We knew that additional fighters and bombers had been surged into the area, but those aircraft are very capable of dropping bunker buster bombs themselves. The focus has been on, as what Ian talked about, this massive ordnance penetrator. That's that 30,000-pound bomb that only the B-2 can carry. But there are also lesser types of bunker busters, 2,000-pound bombs, 5,000-pound bombs, and those are capable of being carried by some of the more conventional aircraft in the U.S. Air Force's inventory. So the question is, were those lesser bunker busters used? Was the massive ordnance penetrator used? And what kind of aircraft were used? Now, as we move forward from this, another thing to look at is potential retaliation from Iran. That has been the main concern at the Pentagon all throughout the discussions as President Trump met with his national security team. Essentially, how do we ensure that if the United States does get involved, should we get involved, what kind of a retaliation could we face? And, of course, you've got 40,000 troops in the Middle East region. We're talking about Iraq, Syria, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. That's where American forces are. Some of those countries some of those bases are very close to Iran. And one of the things that we've seen over the past week is that, for example, at the Navy base in Bahrain, about a dozen small Navy craft left the harbor and were essentially still in territorial waters of Bahrain, essentially to protect them. We also saw that some of the 30 aircraft, most of them refueling aircraft at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, had also left, presumably to protect them. They'd gone to other bases in the region. So the defensive posture that the Pentagon has been talking about for the past week, we saw that in play. And the concern is what happens if Iran is struck by United States aircraft? What happens in terms of retaliation? Does it happen? How quickly can it happen? And then what happens next?
And Louis, big picture on that, just broadening it out a bit more. Obviously, the region has changed dramatically with the toppling of the Assad regime in Syria, the weakening of the Houthis and Hamas and beyond. Who could potentially come to Iran's defense as an ally for them?
In Iraq and Syria, you have these proxy groups that have been greatly degraded over the last year or so, but they still maintain that capability. We have about 2,500 troops inside of Iraq. We have 1,500 inside Syria. And these are not big bases, but they're kind of exposed. Yes, they have some defensive measures. But if these groups were given the green light, we've already seen that they're capable of launching drones and rocket attacks on these bases. But if they're given the green light and go full bore, it could overwhelm potentially some of the defensive systems that they have there. We know that the Houthis, they had been going full bore in their region, attacking commercial shipping. That's why the United States went on this extensive and sustained air campaign recently. And then we know that the Houthis have been launching missiles from Yemen towards Israel, some of which have been intercepted. And so, and a reminder, there are U.S. Navy ships still in the Red Sea. There are Navy ships in the southern Arabian Sea off the coast of Yemen. So potentially these proxy groups could be involved. But the United States, again, we have to see how Iran retaliates, if they choose to retaliate, and whether they choose to actually broaden this by actually attacking some of the locations of some of those bases where U.S. bases are located, some of the countries, and what kind of restraints are going to be placed on them.
Yes, major questions about what happens next, what the U.S. role will be. But regardless of the future actions, right now, the United States is standing side by side with Israel. We are now in this war. And I want to go back to Tel Aviv now. Ian, panel, we are getting some information here, Ian, that Israel was notified in advance of this attack, these three different attacks on nuclear sites there. And Ian, no doubt this is what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wanted.
Oh, undoubtedly, it's not just what Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli cabinet, and honestly, a large number of the Israeli population wanted, but it's also what Netanyahu and others have been lobbying for some time, trying to make the case to the president. And I spoke to the Israeli president just a couple of days ago, and he was making this point, trying to make other leaders understand that this wasn't just about a threat to Israel. This was about a threat to the wider region, a threat to Europe and a threat to the United States, a nuclear-armed Iran, a country that pretty much since the Iranian Revolution in 1979 has sworn to eradicate the state of Israel, has used blood-curdling language to that effect, a country that has actively supported so-called proxy groups, in other words, bankrolling, arming military groups throughout the region to agitate against the United States and also Israel. Hezbollah, for example, in Lebanon, was accused of being one of the primary instigators in the Marines barracks bombing in Beirut back in the 1980s. There have been a number of instances where Iran has been seen as a malign actor against Israel and its Western allies. Part of what we've been witnessing since October 7, 2023 has been an attempt to try and degrade Iran and its sphere of influence. Iran had successfully established, we talk about it as a Shia crescent. Iranians are primarily part of the Shia branch of Islam rather than Sunni branch of Islam, which is dominant, of course, in the Gulf. And they had extended, certainly after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, influence throughout Iran and then into Syria under President Bashar al-Assad. They were very active in the civil war there against the rebels, who obviously recently triumphed, and then into Lebanon itself with Hezbollah operating there. They were able to transfer weapons, transfer knowledge, and this was certainly regarded as a threat for Israel, which is part of the reason why it bombed Lebanon in the first place. And we've seen this gradual dismantling of the so-called Shia crescent. It's been an historic time in the Middle East. Whatever one side anybody may sit upon, you can't deny that the face of the Middle East has been radically changed under the Netanyahu government and with the backing of President Biden and now President Trump. So no surprise, I think, that the Israelis were notified. The Israelis would have to work in concert with the US. It remains to be seen whether any Israeli aircraft or resources were used. We know that Israel had said just a couple of days ago that they controlled the skies over Iran. That would have been very important for the Americans and any operation. In President Trump's message on Truth Social, he says that they hit 3 sites, not just Fordo. And that would potentially imply that obviously that multiple aircraft were involved, and we have to wait and see if Israeli aircraft were also involved. If not, certainly Israel appears to have eyes on the ground, has a number of intelligence gathering sources. It's been going after people on the ground, individuals, nuclear scientists, key military commanders, and it has, like it did in Lebanon against Hezbollah, dismantled a lot of the leadership. But there are huge questions about what the reaction is and what happens next. Now, President Trump again says on Truth Social, he refers to let's make peace. Well, is Iran going to be ready to make peace? Now America has taken part in this bombing. What will the reaction be in the wider region, where we saw on Friday, after midday prayers, significant protests, tens, hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets in many countries throughout the region, angry at Israel's bombing, and a lot of that anger will now turn to the United States. As we've said, there will be huge concerns for the safety of US civilians, US military, US interests throughout this region, which are multifarious, in not just troops on the ground. You have the US Fifth fleet docked in the region, in the Gulf. You have military camps spread throughout the region, but of course you have multiple businesses, embassies, consulates. So there are huge numbers of things to be of concern about. There have been certainly worries about the U.S. consulate here in Tel Aviv and whether or not that would potentially be a site for retaliation. It's been very quiet relatively here in terms of Iranian attacks, and everyone had expected that to change, as it has most nights pretty much around this time. We have to see what the impact on Iran is. I think those people who feel that Iran could be easily bombed into submission do not necessarily understand the country. As we saw in Iraq, even as we saw in Afghanistan, it is countries and the regimes that govern them are not naturally given to immediately acquiescing to foreign intervention, to foreign bombing. In many senses, it can act as a rallying call for the nation to get behind the leader, in this case, this theocracy that has run Iran since the 1980s. And so we have to wait and see what the reaction is. They had threatened in blood-curdling language, the Ayatollah and others, that there would be direct retaliation against American interests in the region. And we have to wait and see whether that was just rhetoric or whether that was a genuine threat that will be followed through on. We have to wait and see what the bomb damage assessment is. Is Israel going to be content to say, we've looked at the damage and we've degraded Iran's nuclear capability enough to be acceptable? And again, speaking to a senior military official just 2 days ago, he made it clear we never said we'd get rid of all of Iran's nuclear capability. We just said that we would degrade it, so it was not an imminent threat.
Ian, panel, stand by for us. We're going to go to Rachel Scott now, who's on the phone joining us from Washington, our senior political correspondent. Rachel, we are getting word that President Trump is going to speak tonight at 10 o'clock, about an hour and a half from now. But again, this is something that President Trump promised going into the election, that he was not going to be the president of forever wars. He was going to end U.S. involvement in some of these wars overseas. Now here he is initiating this attack on Iran, a country of 90 million people, and big questions not only about what comes next, but divisions within his own party and support.
Absolutely, Wynn. And we are already hearing from a number of lawmakers tonight, including Senator Lindsey Graham, who is a Republican senator on Capitol Hill, who had direct conversations with the president multiple times over the last several days, in which he urged President Trump to participate, to join Israel and strike Iran's nuclear sites directly. And we have heard from Senator Graham tonight already. He said that this was the right call, that the regime deserves it, saying, well done, President Trump. But there are plenty of Republicans who have clearly stated that they did not believe that the president should be getting involved. And for that primary reason, this is what the president ran on, being a peacemaker, pulling the United States away from ongoing conflicts, not getting the United States even more involved in ongoing conflicts. The president was asked directly about some of those words from Republicans, and he said, look, the bottom line here is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He believes very strongly in that. But undoubtedly, this is going to divide the party. And the question now is, do Republicans rally behind the president as he moved forward with this action, or do they speak out against it? We know a few did have a few warning signs leading up to it. We are learning tonight, as you said, the president is expected to address the nation at 10 p.m. tonight. And as Ian clearly noted, it cannot really be understated here, just the immense pressure that the president was under from the Israelis. I was told he was under immense pressure from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself. The president, we know, was in very close contact with him. They stayed very close over the last few days, I'm told, talking sometimes even multiple times a day. The president, a week ago, in a remarkable turn of events, said that this was possible, but that the U.S. at that point was not going to be involved. Then we saw him leave the G7 summit early to rush back to the White House, and that kicked off a series of meetings that the president was having with his national security team in the White House day after day, ultimately now leading up to this decision. We know the president was warming up to the idea, and tonight he announced it via Truth Social, and he will address the nation at 10 p.m. tonight Eastern.
Rachel Scott, thank you so much. Let's go to our chief Washington correspondent, John Karl. John, you've actually been in touch with President Trump, speaking with him over the past couple of weeks about a variety of different issues. This idea of the president warming up to the concept, the possibility of striking Iran directly, do you have any sense of how quickly that developed and where it came from?
When he told us that he was going to make this decision at the last second. I don't think that was quite what happened here, but this came together incredibly quickly. And this is, without question, the most consequential decision Donald Trump has ever made. And where this goes, will this be consistent with the promise that he made when he first got in to politics, when he first became a presidential candidate, and he talked about ending forever wars? The question now is, did he just possibly take the first step towards ending what has effectively been a forever war, which is United States adversity with Iran, something that goes back to the hostage crisis and the seizing of our embassy in 1979. Iran has been a challenge for every American president since Jimmy Carter, in many ways overshadowing other initiatives, other efforts to get objectives in the Middle East. So did he effectively put an end to the Iranian threat, or was this the first salvo in yet another forever war in the Middle East? I reached out to a prominent Arab diplomat from a country that's allied with the United States with a simple question. I think this is the question that we should all be asking: what now? What next? And this diplomat said, honestly, no clue. The Iranians have a vote now. So what happens? We have 40,000 troops roughly in the Middle East. That's a force, and it's a force that can be used to protect American assets, to attack the Iranians, but it's also a target with. And the Iranians, their nuclear program may now effectively be gone, but the thousands of mid-range missiles it has, short-range missiles it has, can be used to target not just American troops and American assets in the region, but American allies. I don't know which way this is going to go, but I can tell you this: this has the feel of a decision that is far weightier than any Donald Trump has had to make in his time as a political figure, in his time as president.
Yeah, and nobody starts a forever war thinking it's going to be a forever war. You look back at Iraq and Afghanistan, the intention was things were going to be wrapped up much, much quicker than what ended up happening. And here you have a country, 90 million people. We have already started to see some demonstrations in the streets in recent days against the United States, against Israel, and what all of this could mean going forward. The Ayatollah Khamenei, we're told that he was hunkering down in some undisclosed location, but had already named 3 potential successors. So what happens to him? How does Israel move forward? How do they go and verify what happened at some of these sites that were attacked? Let's go ahead and bring in our Matt Gutman, our chief national correspondent. Matt, you've spent a lot of time throughout this region. I know that you have a lot of sources in Israel and beyond. What are you hearing? What's the reaction you're getting tonight?
I think I just want to jump on the point that John Karl made just now, Whit, and about how historical this moment is and how weighty it is for President Trump. Are we entering into a new forever war? We have to remember that Iran is the world champion of the forever war, waging a cloak and dagger war against the U.S. and Israel, the great Satan and the little Satan, for over 40 years now, right? They have had terrorist attacks behind the scenes. They have launched small-scale attacks. They have built armies around that Ian referred to earlier, that Shia Crescent, or the Ring of Fire, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Yemen, the Houthis, in Iraq, another group called Hezbollah. They have effectively surrounded Israel over the past 40 years and created this bulwark, and Israel has essentially dismantled it. But Iran is not going to let this go, and they are also keen observers of history, right? In 1981, Israel in one fell swoop with 8 or 9 warplanes managed to destroy Iraq's nuclear weapons program in Osirak, and there was no response. In 2007, Israel did the same thing in Syria, and there was effectively no response, destroying its nuclear capability. This is different. Iran is a nation of 90-plus million people, and they showed their incredible fortitude in the 1980 to 1988 war against Iraq. They lost 1 million people. And for the Imam then, the Khomeini, and Khamenei, who is his successor, making a ceasefire with Iraq and ending that war was called drinking from the poison chalice. And basically, they're at that precipice again. Are they going to make a ceasefire, or will they continue fighting? At this point, I think it's understood, again, looking at recent history, when you give up your WMD, that is all you have. Gaddafi gave it up, and we saw how he was essentially butchered in the streets after he was captured. He was overthrown. So it seems, if history is an indicator, that the regime is going to try to hold on as long as possible. You mentioned Khamenei already has appointed 3 successors. I imagine they're going to go underground, and they're going to keep fighting in any way they can, lashing out at the United States and Israel with whatever capabilities they have left. And I think it would be very dangerous for anybody to underestimate the capabilities that Iran has at this moment. Even though they may be significantly degraded, they have been stockpiling them for many, many years. They are a very, very potent and capable adversary.
And Matt, thank you. And something else to watch here is the terror threat in the U.S. and around the world, and what this attack by the United States on Iran potentially does to that. Does it elevate here? I think that many would expect that it likely would. And we know that Iran has been a sponsor of terror all across not only the region but around the world, and we'll see how that plays out too. I do want to go back to the White House. I'm told our Selena Wang is there right now. Selena, you were there earlier as the president arrived for this meeting with his national security advisors. What more are you learning about the discussions and what played out in those meetings?
Well, wait, you and I were actually on the air together as that meeting with his national security team was underway. And the president, for days now, he's been speaking to a wide array of his advisors and allies. In fact, right now, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is here still at the White House. And the president has been weighing a variety of different factions. On the one hand, you have a group of Republicans, more traditional conservatives like Senator Lindsey Graham, who had been urging the president to take forceful, swift military action. Then on the other hand, you really had frustrated members of his MAGA base who were urging the president to hold back, arguing that any U.S. military intervention or action would damage the president's reputation and his campaign promise to end all forever wars. In fact, we had learned from sources that an ally like Steve Bannon, the MAGA podcaster, had actually been playing an outsized role despite the fact that he has no official government position, and that he had this week spoken on the phone with the president. He had also met the president for lunch. He was someone who was urging for restraint. And when it comes to the timeline here, the president was clearly putting positions in place in case he were to strike. We know that Americans had been evacuated out of Israel, the U.S. military also pre-positioning to defend U.S. interests in case Iran were to retaliate. But just days ago, President Trump said that he was going to give himself 2 weeks to make this decision. The thinking was that he was going to buy some time, hoping that the Iranians would come back to the table to negotiate. The Europeans had been also pressing for diplomacy, but the president also said that he wanted to make his decision at the, quote, last second before it was due. And so what we are seeing tonight is a decision that came together very quickly. But as John Carl mentioned earlier, this is potentially the most consequential decision the president has made. And the big question is what happens next. We know from sources that the president wants this to be wrapped up nicely, that he wants this to be contained. But the question is, to what degree did we degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities, and is Iran going to retaliate? President Trump, in his True Social post tonight, he wrote that, quote, now is the time for peace. The question is if he was able to achieve the 2 goals that he wanted, which was number 1, to both end Iran's nuclear program, and number 2, to also have this be a peaceful resolution and end to the war.
Selena Wang for us, thank you. And just a reminder to our viewers here, President Trump is expected to speak in just over an hour at 10 p.m. later tonight from the White House. We'll bring those comments live as they happen. But I do want to bring in our ABC News contributor, former State Department official Steve Ganyard. Steve, also an aviation expert as well and a pilot. Steve, I'd like to ask you more about these B-2 bombers that we were getting word that they were on the move, that there were also tanker aircraft that were following them. We thought they were going to Guam. Was this just one big diversion, or is there more to this?
Yeah, the real key to deception is a big part of war, and well played by the administration to be able to have everybody looking over towards Hawaii and towards Guam. That's where the B-2s are coming from. And maybe what we saw tonight were B-2s that actually flew all the way from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. So we also know that there were B-52s. Last open source intelligence showed that there were at least 4 on the ramp in Diego Garcia, the island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So the B-52s could have participated as well, because we know that there's a very benign air threat over Iran. So why the B-2s? The B-2 is the only aircraft that can carry what's called this massive ordnance penetrator, which is the only weapon that the United States or any country has that can get down to into the depths of where those centrifuge hulls are within the Fordo Mountain. So we know that this weapon, at least unclassified, can penetrate 200 feet. Fordo is a mountain. We don't know how deep some of those hulls were, maybe up to 300 feet. And so it might take several strikes. It may take several waves of B-2s over Fordo to make sure that all of those centrifuge hulls are taken out. So that's really interesting, the way that the administration did it, the way that the Pentagon did it. Sort of look over here, look at the birdie over here, and then come around the backside. But I think there was also some tip-off here. We saw that the discussions that the Europeans had with the Iranians did not go well. And the Iranians came out saying, well, we're willing to talk about it a little bit more. That must have infuriated Trump. Surely it infuriated the Israelis, because it just showed that the Iranians are not interested in a diplomatic approach here. We also had one Iranian official say, if it's a choice between giving up our enrichment capability and war, we pick war. And so it's been made very clear that the decision that the Iranians have taken. And so it was very interesting that the president called a meeting of his national security advisors within the White House tonight on a Saturday night. We also noticed he had 3 stops along the way coming back to the White House. And generally, this is a very talkative president. And we noted that he didn't take an opportunity to talk to press at any one of those 3. And so there were suspicions raised that something might be going on, even though he'd given us that 2-week window previously.
Yeah, we definitely took note of that when the president did not speak going into that meeting. Steve, just wanted to follow up, though. How do we now verify these 3 different nuclear sites, and that the damage was done and that these materials were all destroyed?
That's a good question, Whit. Now, there's very good overhead intelligence coming from space-based assets that will give us very accurate, very detailed looks from a God's eye view. And from that, they'll be able to determine how far, how deep the cratering went, and whether they think that it actually took out the site. But the real answer is we can't know unless somebody gets on the ground. Now, considering how Mossad has been operating with impunity inside of Iran in an extraordinary way, maybe the Israelis have the ability to go in and to find ways to at least make sure that those bunkers at Fordo have been taken out. Remember, this also, the president said that 3 sites were hit, 3 nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and the nuclear development areas around Isfahan. So this is not just one strike. We'll see if the president believes that this will take more than one day, more than one pass. They'll do what's called a bomb damage assessment. They'll have all sorts of ways to do that with some very clever and highly technical capabilities. But to make that final determination whether this is it, whether this will actually take the nuclear program that the Iranians have been working on for decades and setting it back to a place where it cannot be reconstituted.
Steve Ganyard, always appreciate your insights. Want to go back to Ian Panel in Tel Aviv. Ian, I understand you're getting some new information from sources there in Israel about how these B-2s carried out their attacks.
Yeah, I mean, certainly confirmation from an official who says that they are not authorized to talk, confirming that US B-2 bombers were involved in this operation, which I think many of us had assumed anyway, especially the attack on Fordow. It's the most heavily fortified and best protected facility in Iran. It's literally dug into a mountain 60 miles southwest of Tehran. It was believed to contain close to 3,000 centrifuges. Remember, that's the equipment that you use to enrich uranium. And what matters with uranium enrichment is to what percentage it is enriched. And what the International Atomic Energy Agency had recently reported, really just a couple of weeks ago, was they found that Iran's enrichment of uranium up to 60% was almost double what the previous assessment had said. Why does that matter? Well, it takes a relatively short period to get from 60% to 90%, and that is the crunch point at which you can potentially use it for a nuclear weapon. That's part of the reason that Israel has been going after Iran's ballistic missile capability, because once you produce the material, it's a question of how you're going to deliver it. Now, we should restate, and we should not forget, that Iran has consistently insisted that its nuclear program is purely for peaceful civilian purposes. Israel certainly felt that while it didn't show evidence that Iran was trying to make a bomb, there had been some earlier suggestion a few years ago that was the case, that they would have the capacity to do so in a very short period of time. And by that point, it might be too late to act. Now, I think we're going to expect to hear from Israeli officials, but one imagines that will take place after President Trump has spoken. It's 4 o'clock in the morning here, so people are just gathering the news at the moment. Were Israeli jets involved? I think based on a realistic assessment, it's hard to imagine that this could have happened without Israeli assets of some sort. As Steve Ganyard mentioned, Mossad agents have been on the ground. They operated drone action on the ground. We know they've had personnel there. They've been cagey about some of their resources that they've used to carry out that initial lightning, shocking attack where they essentially decapitated the scientific and military leadership of Iran, not the supreme leader, of course, but key decision makers, key military people, and key scientists who were all involved in Iran's nuclear program. So I'm certainly speaking off the record, Israeli officials are very pleased with what they've done. They even intimated to me just a couple of days ago that they could almost declare this as victory at the moment, but they still wanted to feel that they had degraded Iran's capacity to produce uranium to a point where it no longer represented a clear and present danger. And that's certainly what these three operations are about. So we need to wait to hear from the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who presumably will wait until President Trump has spoken. We need to wait and hear from the Israeli Defense Forces about what exactly their role was. But I think the key question for all of us, as we get caught up in the minutiae of these kinds of operations, is what does it mean? Is this a one-off for the United States? President Trump's post on Truth Social would seem to indicate, because he refers to now let's have peace, that he hopes that is a one-off. That may well be wishful thinking, but we don't know. What will the reaction of the Iranian regime be? Will they have bombed them into submission? I think there are many voices in the region, people who know Iran, who will be highly skeptical that will be the case. What will the reaction be against not just Israel, and everybody here is poised that the sirens will go off and there will be an incoming barrage, but what will the reaction be against U.S. interests in the region? Diplomatic missions, U.S. commercial interests, U.S. civilians. There's a large-scale U.S. military presence throughout Iraq. Now, Iraq has these popular mobilization units. These are the Iranian-sponsored militias who are instrumental fighting alongside Iraqi forces against ISIS. But many of them, like Katiba, Hezbollah, not part of Hezbollah in Lebanon, takes his orders direct from Tehran. And I think particularly U.S. forces in Iraq will be seen as potentially vulnerable. They will be on a state of high alert, preparing for some kind of response. I remember when General Soleimani, who was at that time the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command, was killed by the United States. We flew to Iraq at the time, and the response came. There was a massive barrage against U.S. military bases throughout the region. So we have to wait and see. Hear from the president, but crucially, has this been enough, and what's the reaction going to be?
Ian, panel, thank you. Let's go back to John Karl, our chief Washington correspondent, who's been following all of this too. And John, for President Trump, who promised to end forever wars and was going to get us out of the region, now he has initiated attacks, joining a war against Iran, one of our biggest and most feared adversaries. What does this mean for Trump and his presidency?
The argument you're hearing from Trump's supporters tonight is that what he did here was act to end a forever war. Iran has been a threat to the United States, a threat to our allies for almost a half a century. Its nuclear threat, potentially existential threat to Israel and beyond, and that what Trump has done here is acted to take out that threat. If you look across the Republican political spectrum so far, what you are hearing tonight is generally praise for Donald Trump, saying that he bravely acted and did what presidents before him wanted to do, which was end the Iran nuclear threat. You're hearing this. The congressional leadership was briefed on this operation. Top congressional leaders on the Republican side have come out and praised Donald Trump. There's been very little from the Democrats yet. We've heard some, and we've heard a smattering of on the Republican side, Republican Tom Massey, who was very opposed to this effort, saying that this is illegal. Congress needed to authorize the war. So you're hearing some of that from Democrats, but Democrats have been amazingly quiet in this time since we struck Iran. But the big question here, Wade, is what we were talking about before, which is what happens next? Did this really eliminate the Iranian threat, or did it ignite a new threat from Iran? Iran has its nuclear program. We will see in the days ahead, weeks ahead, maybe months ahead, whether this action has really taken out the nuclear threat. But Iran also has a vast arsenal of conventional ballistic missiles that can be used to target American assets in the Middle East, American allies in the Middle East. The next 24, 48 hours are going to be crucial to see what happens with Iran. We heard from the foreign minister today of Iran say that if the United States gets involved, it's going to be very, very bad for everyone. A clear threat that the Iranians will respond. The Iranians had been under bombardment by the Israelis for 9-10 days, and their response was to hit Israel and to hit Israeli targets. They had very clearly avoided a direct attack on American assets in the region. That's now going to change. We'll see. How much did this degrade their ability to respond to attack American assets? But this is a dangerous phase in the days ahead, and it will determine whether or not this is what President Trump's allies are saying right now, which is a brave, courageous effort that has finally taken on and eliminated the Iranian threat, or something that has created the circumstances for a whole other phase in our conflict with Iran.
Yeah, as you noted, a bold and consequential decision that he made. If he is right, it is significant and will have an impact for years to come. If he's wrong, it could be very dangerous for Americans and people all across the region. We will have to wait and see how all of it plays out. Let's go ahead and bring in Jay O'Brien, our congressional correspondent on Capitol Hill. Speaking of some of that reaction, you're getting more of that tonight. Again, general praise from Republicans, but we know that there has been division within the party. What else are you hearing from the Hill?
Exactly right, Whit. You heard John mention, we've heard from top Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, the kinds of folks who would be briefed prior to an operation like this, saying that the White House was in touch with them before all this took place. John Thune briefed, according to multiple sources who spoke to our Rachel Scott. Rick Crawford, the top Republican on the Intelligence Committee, saying the same. Speaker Mike Johnson, I'm told, was also briefed before this operation. He is just out moments ago with a statement, the Speaker. It's a lengthy statement, but he says, in part, quote, this is a, quote, reminder to our adversaries and allies that President Trump means what he says, going on to say that President Trump made it clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. But we're already starting to see some reaction, as John alluded to, from further right Republicans who say that this is the exact opposite, who say that President Trump campaigned on that slogan that he reiterated over and over again, no new wars. We've already seen Steve Bannon react to this, Steve Bannon meeting with the president just days ago. And then there is this curious post-wit from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who made it clear over the last few days that she would oppose any kind of U.S. military action in Iran, typically a staunch ally of Donald Trump's on Capitol Hill. She posted, it seems like maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes before this operation was learned about in the general public, she posted that, quote, this is not our fight. She goes on to say that peace is the answer, Whit. So definitely some divisions on the further right of President Trump's party against this military action.
Jay O'Brien for us in Washington. Thank you. If you're just joining us right now at the top of the hour, we are coming on the air with this breaking news. President Trump ordering a strike on Iran. 3 separate locations using B-2 stealth bombers. These are 3 nuclear sites, including a full payload that he says at the primary site, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. That, according to a social media post from President Trump. He's saying now is the time for peace. We have correspondents across the region and in Washington taking a look at all the details as they come in. But we know that earlier in the day, we were getting flight tracker radar information that those B-2 stealth bombers were on their way from the United States, we thought, to Guam. What we don't know is exactly what happened, if that was some sort of diversion or if there were planes that were moved to different places. We're getting more details on all of that as information comes in tonight. We're going to go back to Louis Martinez, who covers the Pentagon for us. He's been getting some of that information. Louis, I understand you have new info about how all of this played out tonight. What have you learned?
We have just learned from a U.S. official that, yes, B-2 bombers did conduct a strike in Iran, along with several dozen other aircraft. No other details are being provided right now, but at least we've solved one of the mysteries, which is that, yes, those B-2 bombers, not necessarily the ones that were in Guam. I still haven't confirmed that, but we do know now that B-2 bombers did conduct some of the strikes at some of those 3 locations identified by President Trump in his Truth Social posting, and that several dozen other U.S. military aircraft were also involved in that strike.
And Louis, do we have any sense about what happens next now? We've talked about the verification process, about President Trump says that these attacks were successful, but do we know if there are troops in the region who may join Israeli troops to potentially go check out some of these sites and see what damage was done?
Well, one of the things that is always going to take place is bomb damage assessment. The term that was used at the Pentagon is a BDA. And sometimes it can happen pretty quickly, and because you have drone aircraft, you have other aircraft that have surveillance capability that are monitoring the area that is going to be struck by the lead bombers who are carrying out and dropping the munitions. So in this case, there may have been some aircraft that had eyes on, if you will, that were monitoring that, and that feed is more than likely going to be analyzed to see how successful a strike it was. In some cases, the BDA can take hours. In other cases, it can take days. So it remains to be seen exactly what we're going to see here. But in terms of this particular strike that was carried out by U.S. bombers, knowing that there were several dozen other aircraft, we can kind of imagine what the roles of those aircraft were. Potentially, they were providing security. So in case there was something along the lines of other aircraft in the skies, we know that Iran has a not very capable Air Force. We're not even sure that some of their aircraft have even gotten off the ground over the last week. as hostilities have taken place between Israel and Iran. We know that it is a very degraded air defense environment for the Iranians, which means that the Israelis have had air superiority. Remember that mention from President Trump earlier in the week where he said we have air superiority, and of course at the time we raised questions because the United States had not been involved over Iran, but we had seen the Israelis being the only ones carrying out air operations inside of Iran. And the way they were doing that is because over the last year there were 2 airstrikes carried out inside of Iran, and namely the one in last October severely degraded their strategic air defense systems, which meant that the Israeli aircraft could come in at a distance and fire their standoff weapons. And with those strategic air defense systems gone, they were flying at will over Iran. And I think that situation makes it a little bit easier for American aircraft flying above Iran. Of course, there's always the risk because there will always be air defense systems around some of these facilities, whether they've been taken out or not. There's always a risk when you're flying over an adversarial country's territory. But in this case, we know that there were several dozen other aircraft involved in the strike, along with the B-2 bombers.
Louis Martinez, thank you so much. I want to go back to Steve Ganyard, our ABC News contributor, former State Department official. Steve, I know that you've been reporting on the buildup of American forces in the region. It's really quite unprecedented what we're seeing.
It is. It's extraordinary, Whit. We will soon have, when the Ford leaves Norfolk and gets to the region in probably about a week or 10 days, we'll have 3 aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf region. That has not happened since 2003. So there's an unprecedented amount of naval air power and naval power in the region, to include those ships that we've seen offshore of Israel that are participating in the defense of Israel with the missiles that are able to knock down incoming ballistic missiles. On the Air Force side, there have been hundreds of airplanes deployed not only to the region but to Europe. There are tankers backed up all over Europe. In just about every NATO country has lots of U.S. tankers that will provide an option to the president. So clearly the strikes that went on tonight were probably enough. Maybe they'll have to go back and reattack one more time, but it's probably enough to take out all of the nuclear sites that the Israelis hadn't touched yet. But the amount of firepower, the amount of combat capability and capacity that the president has built up in the region is far more than would be needed just to take out the nuclear facilities. So perhaps this is part of the deception and the mind games that he wants the Iranians to know, that if the U.S. decides to go back in, if the Iranians do something to go after U.S. troops in the region, we have to be concerned about sleeper cells in the United States. If there is something that comes back at the U.S., then that's going to be a problem for Iran. And the U.S. certainly has the amount and the capacity of military power that would be used to go back at Iran and to finish the job.
But Steve, the Iranians have said that you could destroy our nuclear facilities, but you can't destroy our knowledge, the information that we've built up over decades on this. What kind of threat is that? I mean, if the facilities are gone, how quickly could they potentially rebuild the material to make a bomb?
Well, with the facilities gone, it's going to take a long time, because the centrifuges are really what would need, as Ian was talking about before, that most of the enrichment is at about the 60%, but it's only about another 5% of effort to get up to 90. So the centrifuges are key. To your point, though, the human knowledge, the intellectual property that they have developed over the years to be able to think about how to develop a nuclear program is key. So what do the Israelis do? In the first few minutes of this opening, a salvo here against Iran, they borrowed from the Hezbollah playbook, and they took out many, if not of the top 10, top 15 nuclear scientists that are working on the nuclear enterprise within Iran. So they took out the people who knew and had the knowledge, and so that, they hope, will be enough to prevent the nuclear program from being recapitalized. One additional point here. So we have to figure out where the enriched fuel is and who can get to that. So that will be part of any post-war deal where it's the IAEA, it's some independent body that's going to want to get in and secure the previously enriched uranium to make sure that the Iranians cannot use that to reconstitute their program or to build a nuclear weapon.
And Steve, a follow-up to this, because I think a lot of Americans at home right now are wondering, what this means for us and our safety around the world. I know the region has changed so much in recent years. You mentioned proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. Who could potentially come to Iran's defense as an ally? What does Russia do? What does China do? How should Americans be looking at this?
Yeah, you'll notice that both Russia and China said, "Hey, yeah, nice. We like your drones and we like your oil, but we're not getting involved." So right now, Iran is totally isolated, and not only are they isolated, but they have no defenses. And not only is the Mossad operating on the ground with impunity, but the Israeli Air Force is flying over the skies of Iran unimpeded. So they have no friends, they have no allies, they have nobody that's going to come to their aid. So this sets up some concern about revenge attacks. If you'll notice, I believe it's been more than 24 hours since a ballistic missile has been launched from Iran towards Israel. That is because the Israelis have been working very hard to knock down all the launchers, to go to the facilities where they store these ballistic missiles. And so we see this decrease. And they're shooting drones, but drones are not as effective. They take a long time to get to Israel. So a very effective 8 or 9 days where the Israelis have taken down that ballistic missile capability. As that goes along, and as the Iranians continue to be pummeled, and while the Israelis piece by piece take apart their military, their IRGC, their internal security apparatus, this is going to eventually get to a point where the regime will be weakened and something will happen. What will happen? We don't know. Is something better going to take the place of the regime, or is it something worse? This is always the risk in war, not knowing what the branches and sequels and outcomes will really be.
And in a country of 90 million people. Steve Ganyard, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I want to go to Aaron Katersky, our chief investigative correspondent. And Aaron, I want to ask you more just about the domestic threats. We know in the U.S., we'd already been operating in a high threat, high alert environment. Some of those threats, domestic homegrown political terrorism that we've seen. But now, how does this change the calculation? How might law enforcement agencies across the country respond to these attacks?
They're already responding with, as we speak, the NYPD in New York is responding to cultural, religious, and diplomatic sites associated with Israel and Iran. This is out of an abundance of caution. They say there is no specific threat, but they want to make sure there's a deterrent presence at these locations. Because the U.S. has to be considered, the U.S. homeland now has to be considered a target of Iran. And although, as you've been discussing with, Iran is highly degraded from Israeli attacks now from the U.S. The U.S. is now a player and is a belligerent actor in the eyes of Iran. So the U.S. homeland has to be considered a target, both from proxy groups that Iran can dispatch and has already shown some adeptness in attacking U.S. interests, both here and abroad, but also through cyber attacks. And there's law enforcement officials have been told to expect heightened cyber threats from Iran. And remember, the Iranians have already targeted President Trump personally, holding him responsible for the General Soleimani attack, and they've sought revenge ever since.
Always the threat of a lone wolf attack, too. And that's always a major concern for law enforcement, somebody who's maybe not directly getting any guidance from Iran or Iranian proxies, but inspired by what's happened in that country. Aaron Katersky for us, thank you. Let's go back to Rachel Scott in Washington. Rachel, I understand that we're learning President Trump or the White House gave some heads up to Israel before these strikes.
Exactly what I just spoke to a senior administration official who told me that the United States did, in fact, give Israel a heads up ahead of these strikes. That senior administration official also telling me that the president spoke directly with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the U.S. carried out these strikes. That is according to a senior administration official at the White House. We've talked about the pressure that Israel put on the Trump administration and directly on the president. We know that Netanyahu and the president have been very close. I was told that at one one point they were speaking maybe even multiple times a day, and that a source told me that the president received direct pressure from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the U.S. to get more involved. It was an option that the president at first was keeping an arm's length distance to, and then increasingly he started to warm up to this idea, asking in the Situation Room about these options, about whether or not the United States could successfully carry out this attack. The president tonight saying that ultimately this was successful, but as he's been in close contact with the Israeli prime minister, he did speak to him yet again after these strikes.
Rachel Scott for us, thank you. Let's go back to John Karl. John, I understand you had a conversation with a very good source in all of this, President Trump himself. What is he saying to you tonight?
Yeah, I just got off the phone with him, short conversation. The bottom line from him was, in his words, this was a tremendous success tonight. When I, engaged with him on questions of how, how this was undertaken and what the next steps are, he did not want to engage on that right now. He obviously is addressing the country in less than an hour, but he did pick up the phone to tout what he called a tremendous success tonight. Separately with a conversation with another good source, not President Trump, who said that there was a lot more to this attack than taking out the nuclear sites in Iran. The big question now, of course, as we have discussed, is what will Iran do to retaliate? It has a vast arsenal of conventional weaponry, of ballistic missiles, mid-short-range ballistic missiles that can hit a whole range of targets throughout the Middle East, as we've seen over the last 10 days with Israel. And it appears that tonight, according to my source, there was a major focus on destroying as much of that as possible as well, not simply the nuclear sites, but also targeting Iran's ability to respond to what happened tonight.
And John, as you know, all presidents come into office with plans for the homeland, their domestic agenda and all the things that they want to do. And Trump himself very vocal about ending foreign wars and not wanting to engage in long, extended conflicts. This, no doubt, I mean, can you even compare this to a decision he made in his first term? Is this the biggest, most consequential decision he's ever made as a president of the United States?
I don't think there's any doubt that on the facts we know right now, this is the most consequential decision Donald Trump has ever made. And we don't know, is this going to be consistent with his promise to end forever wars? His allies are making that case. They're actually saying that although this was a military action, it was a military action that they believe will prove to have done away with a threat that has been a shadow over American policy in the Middle East for nearly a half a century, the threat of the Iranian regime. But let's remember also what Donald Trump said in his inaugural address. Very important words, besides saying he wanted to be known as a peacemaker. He said that he will measure results by the wars that he has ended, and perhaps more importantly, by the wars that he has not, that we do not get into. Now, we don't know. Is this, again, going to be proved to be effectively ending a low-grade war that the United States has been engaged in for 46 years, since the Iranians, the mullahs took over in 1979? Or is this the beginning of another more dangerous, more violent, more active phase in the U.S.-Iran conflict? But whatever it is, this will be the moment that, at least from the facts that we have right now, Donald Trump will be judged by.
Yeah, major questions tonight and what happens tomorrow. John Karl, thank you. Let's go back to Ian Panel in Tel Aviv. And Ian, we've already seen prior to tonight, some of these attacks, some of the missile attacks on Israel have been getting through. A lower percentage, but we've seen some of the damages on hospitals and residential buildings there. It's been quiet so far tonight, but what are Israelis expecting in the coming days?
Yeah, I think the immediate reaction will be people will be fearing the worst. Interestingly, the Home Front Command has just issued new guidelines to people, basically activating the highest state of preparedness. In other words, nobody should go to work, all businesses will be closed, nobody goes to school, and everybody should stay close to shelters. In other words, everybody is bracing for an Iranian response. We certainly heard all the various lurid threats that we have been issued by the Ayatollah, by the Iranian foreign minister and others over the last few days about what would happen if America joined this war, which it has now done. President Trump and others may be hoping that this is a one-off action and that will draw a line under events. Well, as the military gets to say, the enemy gets a vote in that, and we have to wait and see what the official Iranian response will be. We have heard from the Iranians that at least 2 of those facilities that were struck tonight by U.S. resources had been evacuated beforehand. Yoav Gallant, who of course is a former Israeli defense minister, posted just in the last few minutes, President Trump took a bold decision. The world is now a safer place. But we're also hearing already threats from one of the Iranian proxies. This is the Houthis, again, on X. Hazam al-Assad, who's a member of the political bureau of the Houthi movement, saying Washington must bear the consequences of this strike. Steve Ganyard, who you were speaking to earlier, got it absolutely right in terms of the sense that Iran has no major friends in the region. It has commercial allies, ones that it has supplied weapons to, in particular Russia and China, but none of which are ready to come to Iran's aid. The proxies, all of these proxy groups have been severely downgraded, primarily through Israeli military action over the last few months. Hamas, of course, Hezbollah in particular, the decapitation of Hezbollah's leadership, and, of course, the U.S., together with Israel, was bombing the Houthi rebels who are supplied by Iran. They're based in Yemen. But why are they a threat? They're a threat because of the Straits of Hormuz. This key shipping lane will now be seen as a potential target for Iran and Iranian forces. And it is critical for oil supplies, not so much for the United States, but certainly that reach China and the European Union. Those shipping lanes are absolutely vital. Now, the deal that was struck between the Trump administration and the Houthis, much to Israel's annoyance, it was a direct deal, essentially guaranteed that the Houthis would not attack U.S. facilities, so U.S. military craft going through the region or U.S. tankers. Now the question is that deal still in place? Will the Houthis regard it as having been breached by the United States? Well, if that statement means anything, and one should expect that there will be a lot of lurid statements, we have to wait and see what the action is. But if they do, then U.S. craft going through that area will be susceptible.
Yeah, it's a very important point, the potential global economic implications and ramifications as a result of this escalation here. Ian, panel, thank you once again. I want to go back to Matt Gutman. Matt, you've covered this region for so many years. What more are you learning tonight about Iran, how they are responding to this from your sources?
I have a source that I just texted with, and he reminds me that Israel and the U.S. had some sort of war games about a year ago. Now, they have war games every single year, but this one was different because for the first time, it focused on offensive capabilities against Iran, essentially some sort of preparation for this very kind of attack. Now, the source says they did not plan a year ago for this to be happening right now. They did not know it was going to happen, but it was unique, and it was done under the Biden administration. Some kind of attack, planning for offensive action using a combination of Israeli and U.S. capabilities, including military capabilities, but also intel against Iran and against, they didn't say at the time, but now it's become clear, against its nuclear capabilities, to dismantle those nuclear capabilities. Now, that person says that they are confident that at this point, the damage to the nuclear sites in Iran is irreversible. And I think it's key to remind folks at home that when we talk about destroying these sites, it's not about reducing it to absolute zero. It's about buying a lot of time for the world to wait for a regime change or for something different to happen. And I think that the understanding is, especially among the Israeli military defense echelon at this point, is that what they hoped would be done has been done. And it's also my understanding that Israel has been obviously trying to bomb those nuclear facilities in Natanz and Fordo and Isfahan. And they've been going at it for, as you all mentioned, 9-10 days now. But they only have 2,000-pound bombs. The type of bomb, that mass ordnance penetrator, the MOP, that we're talking about is 30,000 pounds. It is specifically geared to penetrate deep inside mountains, which is where Fordo is, and these nuclear capabilities are. And this is the kind of thing that Israel simply couldn't do alone. It has been trying, basically digging giant holes with regular bombs or more conventional guided bombs. And now they have what they had always hoped for. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, it should be remembered, has been talking about this for the better part of his career. This is dismantling Iran's nuclear ambitions has been something that he's talked about for about 20 years or more. And this is the culmination of everything that he has hoped for. Internally in Israel, they're also talking about how this keeps him in power. It prevents him from being indicted or from being convicted at this point because it puts Israel essentially in another state of war, and they can't be distracted from that. But there is a significant amount of satisfaction in Israel with the way this has been conducted. The question now is how the Iranians decide to retaliate against forces in the region. That source telling me he predicts that there will be a ceasefire and that Iran will come to the table in 2 weeks or risk losing the regime entirely. He emphasizes that the military leadership in Iran is dead. Israel killed the very top leaders, essentially the chief of staff, the head of intelligence, the head of their air force, the head of their rockets and drones, or missiles and drones, and a lot of the know-how that could be able to recreate any sort of nuclear capacity in the future. A lot of those scientists have also been assassinated in the process. So this person is very satisfied, but the question is, where do they go from here, and what kind of retaliation are we seeing?
Matt Gutman for us. Let's go back to Ian Panel in Tel Aviv there. And Ian, you're getting some new information. We know this pressure campaign was happening from the Israelis to the White House to get involved. What more are you learning?
Yeah, well, we're certainly learning. This is from two sources here in the country. The political and security cabinet convened here. This was hours before the U.S. strike on Iran in an underground bunker. It's not clear if they are still there, whether they were watching these events unfold live. But it looks like, given the president's comments, and we know from Mary Bruce and others, that Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to President Trump before these attacks took place, that there seems to have been close coordination. Again, Steve Ganyard mentioned the Israeli resources on the ground. Not just aircraft, but they've got drones over the skies of Iran. We're also hearing from Iranian military officials and local officials in those areas also confirming that there were explosions in those key sites in Natanz, in Isfahan. But they're also saying, certainly Iranian TV is reporting, that the uranium stockpile had been moved out of the area, thereby reducing the risks of radiation.
Panel for us, thank you. And once again, we're getting multiple sources reporting that those B-2 stealth bombers were part of these attacks at 3 separate nuclear sites in Iran. The president, speaking to our John Carl tonight, calling this a tremendous success. Remember, he put a bit of a deadline, 2 weeks, for him to make a decision, but that decision came down tonight. And he says it was decisive. We are waiting to see more reaction from Iran and from Washington and from Israel. The skies above Tel Aviv so far have been quiet, but we are waiting to see how this all plays out. ABC News will have continuing coverage throughout the evening. Here we'll come back. President Trump will be speaking later tonight at 10 p.m. to address the American people. We'll be right back.
All across America.
Good morning. Good morning.
Wherever we are, it feels like home.
Man, it's good to be home.
Good morning, America! GMA, it's an invitation to come together and brighten your morning.
It's the music event of summer. CMA Fest, with can't-miss performances by Blake Shelton, Megan Maroney, Keith Urban, Kelsey Ballerini, and more.
You don't want to miss it.
CMA Fest, presented by SoFi, Thursday on ABC.
It's time to party!
Monday, July 7th.
And now we're in the jungle.
Ready to find some love.
Let's dance, Paradise. Paradise is back.
Good things are coming.
New beach.
Viva la Costa Rica!
New challenges. And here come the Goldens.
Oh, look, I got my inner knees done. They're reformed.
Bachelor in Paradise premieres July 7th on ABC and stream on Hulu.
We're back, baby.
Yes.
Hey.
I'm so excited to be here.
We actually watch you every night. You're in our bedroom every night.
The feud gets wild.
Come on. Grandma, he smells really good.
Weird.
Are you ready for this? You ready?
Take two. And famously funny. Name something your mate's booty has in common with the basketball.